Thank you. Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to this special meeting of the Loveland Board of Education. Thank those of you who joined us for the through of the strategic vision plan next door that was held from 5 o'clock on. And I would like to call this special meeting to order at 6 p.m. Mr. Giuffre, can we have a roll call?
Mr. Doherty.
Here.
Reverend Eiler.
Here.
Dr. Lorenz.
Here.
Dr. Schwetzner.
Here.
Mrs. Washburn.
Here. All present. For the purposes of folks who are watching us online, we are in person in the Loveland Middle School library. We have some guests with us this evening, and so all board members are present. First item on the agenda would be to adopt the agenda. Is there a motion to adopt?
Second.
Washburn moved and Mr. Doherty seconded. Any questions about the agenda?
Other than it's missing the pledge.
Okay. Well, we will
Pledge.
have the pledge afterwards, after we adopt the agenda. Mr. Giuffre, can we have a roll call on that?
Mrs. Washburn.
Yes.
Mr. Doherty.
Yes.
Reverend Eiler.
Yes.
Dr. Lorenz.
Yes.
Dr. Schwetzner.
Yes.
Motion carried. Thanks for the reminder, Mr. Giuffre. I'll invite everyone to stand and join. Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We have two items, topics of discussion for this evening, so we'll move right into the strategic vision, and I will turn the meeting over to Mr. Broadwater.
Thank you, Dr. Lorenz. First of all, I want to say thank you to the design team members that are here this evening. We appreciate you coming. And also the design team members that showed up at 5 o'clock. We had a very good turnout and a very rainy day, but I do want to say thank you for all the hard work you put in. It was 3 nights, and I'm going to kind of review the evenings that we had spent, but the product that we showed in the cafeteria, we developed the goals, the strategies, and now for the next year, we're going to start to develop what those action steps look like. And we're going to involve our staff, administrators, and stakeholders and make sure that we're moving in the right direction with what the community wanted us to do. So the presentation we will start with is to review the dates, and I'll just go through them real quick as you're pulling it up. The first evening was, and we've already gone through these, but I just want to go through them quickly. The showcase night was February 9th. We had about 50 individuals show up as we reviewed the Portrait of a Tiger. The Portrait of a Tiger kind of morphed into what we have now, which Mr. Setters is going to go over later, which is our Loveland graduate and what that looks like. We did a survey of all the stakeholders, which was over 500 respondents. We had a community input session on February 23rd, where we had 4 different stations set up so that we could go through some talking points there. We had a design team selection. We were able to select every single individual who wanted to participate. We were able to select them. Community members, students, staff, parents, all were involved. We had approximately 120 members on any given night. You did not see 120 members, but we did have a very good representation. Some evenings it would be 100, some down to 75, but we had a very good representation. And I think ultimately what I would say is I believe we have given our community, all of our stakeholders, the opportunity to participate in whether it be a survey, whether it be on the design team, whether it be coming to the community nights, which the Board of Education had asked us to do. I believe the product that we have does represent the focus that we have for our community, and that's how we would like to proceed the next 5 years, systematically, methodically, so that we can sustain what we want to do. This isn't changing things overnight. It's making sure that we have a direction of where we want to go for the next 5 years. The design team met on March 10th to begin the process, April 14th, where they started to formulate some things. We had writing teams, which was basically administrators, staff members, teachers, where we would develop the goals and strategies. And then we had Tigers Inc. on the 3rd community evening, went through and got the input from the community. The design team met May 16th to incorporate any of that feedback. And we are presenting to you tonight, like we said we would. So May 18th, the design team, number 3, they took a look at what the writing team did to adjust anything. After the 18th, we had our writing team adjust or make any comments. We also, Mr. Setters and I and Mr. Connor, who was very vital in what we were doing, sat down with Reverend Eilert as well and went through all of the results that we had and what that strategic vision looked like, the goals, the strategies, and got some very good suggestions from him as well. So that leads us to the gallery walk that we had this evening, where we had a lot of great conversations. And again, I appreciate those individuals from the design team that showed up and those individuals that emailed or texted and said they couldn't because they had family obligations, which we obviously understand. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew Setters to lead us through the strategic vision and the outcome of that, where the slide would be our Loveland Tiger students. That's it.
He's going to give me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know I had it.
Excellent.
Right.
So
Good
for
hustle though, Mr. White. I appreciate it.
I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Andrew Setters, the Director of Communication, Community Engagement for anybody watching at home. And thank you to the members of the board for having us here tonight. Start out with our Loveland Tiger students. So if you remember, we had our portrait of a tiger, which was the result of community engagement work that happened a few years ago. The beginning of the strategic vision process was really to take a look at that, reaffirm it, and some of the feedback that we got was used to kind of recreate it into this document, our Loveland Tiger students. This is shared goals and aspirations for our students. We want them to pursue academic excellence, to become career ready, lifelong learners, curious about different pathways to success, engaged in learning beyond the classroom. We want them to develop real world skills, to become resilient, problem solvers, communicators, and critical thinkers. Seek a collaborative culture to become active listeners, productive team members, respectful of cultural diversity, and champions of our core values of care, respect, and responsibility. And our Loveland Tiger students are community ambassadors who value leadership, giving back, good citizenship, thinking globally, and acting locally. Some of the language that's in this, you're going to see pop up again in our strategic vision as we kind of make our way through it. The overview of the strategic vision, there are 4 goal areas: student success, collaborative culture, community engagement, and fiscal responsibility. Each of them has a statement attached to it. For people who are watching at home, this strategic vision document is available in board documents if you want to read along. The student success area, Loveland City School District prioritizes individualized learning opportunities in the pursuit of academic excellence to create career-ready lifelong learners. Goal 2, Loveland City School District develops resilient individuals motivated by a culture of continuous growth who are given space to thrive in a safe, nurturing environment. Goal 3, Loveland City School District is a vital part of the Loveland community, provide opportunities for two-way engagement and communication. And goal 4, fiscal responsibility. Loveland City School District supports our students' evolving educational and facilities needs in a fiscally responsible manner. And we'll jump into goal 1. I'm not going to read every strategy and every bullet point in here because it's quite a bit, but we had a lot of great feedback that helped us get to this point. One of the challenges in coming to a finished product is taking the feedback of many people and distilling it into what are the big umbrella topics that arise to that are the common themes. One of the common themes was this goal 1A, career pathways, that we will expose students to the many pathways to lifelong success through enlistment, enrollment, or employment, making sure that students are aware that it's not just college as a pathway that will get them to success, but there are many pathways. Personalized learning. Loveland City School District will match our teaching and learning strategies to each student's strengths and help them discover their individual potential. So this is really what teachers will do to engage with students. Goal 1C, interest-based learning, is allowing students to explore their interest and encourage learning beyond the classroom. Goal 2 is our collaborative culture. That's a phrase that you'll see in our Tiger students, the collaborative culture being one of the big umbrella ideas there. A whole child focus, where we'll focus on wellness by supporting the whole child. Building continuity. This was one of the areas of feedback that we got from a lot of people, is making sure that we're guiding students from grade to grade and building to building in a consistent manner. If you think about the way our district is structured, you have a lot of people, students are moving between buildings about every 2 years. If you have 2 or 3 children in different buildings, that can be a little overwhelming if things are just a little bit different from one campus to another as students move from building to building. We want to make sure that we are making it consistent, not just for the families as they navigate those challenges, but for the kids as well. Welcoming environments. Loveland City School District will establish a culture where every student is a valued member of our school community. So the 3 bullet points around that are about meeting the learning needs of our diverse Loveland City School students, building on our traditions of including students of all abilities in the full school experience, and working to remove barriers to student involvement and activities that enrich their school experience. Goal 3, community engagement. This is, as you might imagine, my favorite area of this, being the communication and community engagement director. Some big themes emerged. People want two-way engagement. They want our students involved in the community, and they want the community to be involved in the school district as well. So Loveland City School District will build relationships with families and community members to develop students as community ambassadors. Again, that community ambassadors phrase is one of the phrases that's in our Loveland Tiger students. Two-way communication. We will communicate effectively with our stakeholders. That's the challenge, right, of all communication, is to make sure that it's effective. And focus on community pride. Loveland City School District will continue to build upon the great Be Loveland spirit and the Tiger traditions community. One of the things that we heard from one of our faculty members who was involved in some of the conversations, we talked about maybe improving community pride or rebuilding it, and they said that's not what needs to be done. We need to just continue to focus on it. Rebuilding it implies that there's something broken. And we just need to focus on it and continue that. And then fiscal responsibility. This was a big theme that ran through a lot of the feedback that we got. And it breaks down into the 3 big areas of community engagement, informing stakeholders about the needs that our students have and the decision-making, and also school funding. There are school funding challenges that are apparent in all of this. Diversification of funding sources. Loveland City School District will establish community, educational, and corporate business partnerships. Those partnerships are a big part through every step of this process. The call from the community was to take advantage of partnerships, that there are people in the community who want to help. There are sources of funding, there are sources of knowledge and information, there are sources of learning opportunities, and you'll see those partnerships pop up in several places in this document. And then improving educational environments, goal 4C. Loveland City School District will create a long-term funding model to ensure ongoing student success. One of the things I want to point out here is point 2, embark on a strategic facility planning process to determine needs. Really investing the time and the discussion to go through a process similar to our strategic vision process, specifically around facilities. There needs to be a lot of discussion and investment in those conversations and getting the community on the same page before there's any talk of making moves forward on any new facilities. So that is going to be one big step as we move forward. And the next step after that will be taking this plan and turning it into action steps and having costs associated with it. And that some Rob Waters going to get into. And Mike, I'm going to bring you the clicker.
Sure. So looking at the 5-year strategic vision, what does it mean? We don't want it to just be words on a piece of paper. We file, it gets dust. It's got to be actionable. It's got to be part where it's specific, measurable, it's achievable, it's reachable, and so forth. So what I wanted to show you, first of all, was action plans, get into some examples of discussions we had where it was high school busing, pathways, some staffing considerations, just kind of review some of the conversations we had and how that's going to be looked at in the strategic vision. So when you look at next steps, the action plan template is going to be very similar to the board members. I gave you action plans like a community action plan. We did our business manager action plan. That was throughout the year. These action plans are going to be very similar. This is a template we've been working on. It is not going to be the final product. We want to get Dr. Orson here. She will go through it as well. But the information we have, for example, goal 1, which is the first goal of student success, would be written in there. I'll take the example of career pathways. The project has to find, we want to define those. And the first thing that I believe we're going to end up doing is listing what we already do. So Drew Mitchell does a great job with pathways. What is it that we do? Where do we want to go with that? And when you look at the estimated time frame, when we are done, I want it to be a 5-year time frame. So end of 22, 23, where are we? 23, 24, so on. And then the costs associated with it, there may be no cost. There may be costs because we believe there's going to be new curriculum, or there may be a staff member that's needed. So it's all going to be dependent on the strategic vision. I can tell you the questions I were getting this evening is, well, what's the first year going to look like? How are you going to get it going? So the first year, in my mind, you kind of have to go slow to go fast. So we're going to sit, we're going to look, what is it that we do? We're going to get our, so career pathways, for example, we'll get Drew Mitchell, who is vital in the career pathways. We'll have him in the committee. We'll sit down, we'll look at what we do. Where do we want to be in 5 years? And what does that look like? And I can also tell you, part of having a strategic vision is making sure that we're not adding to people's plates without it being focused and without taking something away from it. And I'm going to go over staffing a little bit where we are, but a couple of years ago, there were about 50 staff members positions that were cut from Loveland City Schools. So we can't keep adding to plates without being focused. So if Mr. Knapp at the middle school says, Mike, I want to introduce the web program for our 8th graders that are going to be, or for our 7th graders coming over, it's going to be great, David. How does that tie in to our strategic plan? Because we're adding work, and what's that going to do for our kids? So if you go to goal 2, collaborative culture, the whole child focus, building continuity. Building continuity means we're going to do the same program. The web is the same link crew at the high school. So then it's Mr. Knapp. I can see where that fits. How's it fitting on your school improvement plan, and who's going to do it? Okay. And so it allows us to focus on what it is we want to do for kids. We always have great ideas, and teachers always want to be doing things for kids. But if an idea comes and it's a great idea, but it doesn't fit into this, then we have to say it's not where we are right. We have to focus on the resources we have, whether it be staffing, finances. We need to be able to focus on what we're trying to do. So with the action plan template, you will see one for each goal. So you'll have 4 goals. In 1A, it's going to be different people than 1B, different than 1C. But at the end of the day, what we want to have is an action template for all 4 goals and for 5 years, so we can start checking off where we're going and be strategic about what we're doing. The next conversation that kept coming up was high school busing. Okay, and so when you get into tough topics like high school busing, it comes down to funds, right? And so when you look, and drivers now, unfortunately, but when you look at where we are, goal number 4, improving educational environments. Number 1, balance student needs and strategic plan goals with our commitment to fiscal responsibility. We will always look at fiscal responsibility. If you look at what we have done in terms of staffing this year, we have done the majority of our staffing through attrition. If there's a retirement, we'll look and see where can we use that position? Does it need to be in the same place? So we always want to look how it's going to fit in fiscally. The high school busing, additional funds are needed to begin the discussion of returning the high school busing for the high school. And so as the design team, as I sat in the different groups and they ask about high school busing, it's important to be real and let people know the genuine answer is you need to have additional funds because that was a cut. That was a cut a couple of years ago. And so is that a priority, or is it not a priority? The shortage of drivers has necessitated the change in start times, and we've got that out, and the parents are aware of those. And I've had good discussions. When we made those changes, we went to a 3-tier system. That 3-tier system with a little bit of forethought is going to help us bring high school busing back if there's additional funds and there's drivers, have to have drivers. But it would allow us to be able to bring that back and possibly look at a later start time, which is what the research would tell you. The 2 constraints, which I've already hit, are finances and drivers. It would take approximately 500,000. I say approximately because we don't know the exact amount. At $500,000, that is 0.5 mils because every mill here at Loveland is worth $1 million. But we're going to need 10 drivers, plus or minus 10 drivers, so that we can make sure that we are providing the same transportation. Start times would be part of our larger discussion. So when you look at even the the item of high school busing, you're talking about start times, you're talking about staffing, you're talking about finances. It's a large discussion that needs to be had if that's the priority that the community is setting for. So that is one example of how you could use the strategic vision. The next example I've kind of hit a little bit with pathways and partnerships. I met with Bruce Mitchells today, and we started talking about what does that look like when we start looking at a 5-year plan and how we're going to help kids. And this is all about helping kids. As somebody who just had, my daughter just graduated high school Friday, wants to go into business and had very little exposure to it, And so it was me as a parent trying to get her the exposure. We as a district should be providing the exposure so that our students, before they head off to whether it be the armed forces or employment or college, they've had the experience to know if that's the direction they want to go. So with the strategies, you can read through those, but I think it's important that we develop action steps and how we're going to get there and the costs associated. If we want to develop a robust pathway and partnership, what you'll see in other districts, they will have one person designated doing that because it is a large job. You're developing business partnerships and pathways, and that takes time. And Mr. Connor and Mr. Mitchell have done a great job. And our community through this strategic vision process has said it's important. And I would agree, it is important for our kids. I think it's the last slide I've got here. Well, I have a couple more. So the next thing I want to make sure that we review, the full-time equivalent, we've kind of used that FTE expression a lot this year because it is important to me to control finances and make sure we're aware of it. And the majority of our finances are people. That's what we have. We don't have many discretionary funds other than people. And so when you look at the history of our FTE, and Mr. Collier provided me the numbers, when you look at May of 2020, our total FTEs was 551.7 staff members. 0.7 means they're working part-time. That's what that means. November of 2021, we had 504.5, and we would be right near that number, if not at that number right now, currently. When you look at next year, every single FTE has been adjusted due to attrition. We've been able to keep it even Steven, except we've got one additional FTE next year, and that is going to be a paraprofessional that is needed due to special ed state requirements. And that's something that you just don't have control over, but it's a state requirement that we need to have a paraprofessional. So there will be one additional FTE. So out of 504, we have managed it very, very well. The one is one that we did not have control of due to that. If you look at those cuts, and this was more for me not having been here to understand where we were at one point, they're under A, you had 47.2 FTE reduction. That's 8.5% of the total staff was reduced. B there, 17.5 FTE in transportation, 24% reduction in transportation staff. I put that in there so that we realize that was a natural reduction by the high school busing being cut. And so I didn't want it to muddy the waters in other parts with staffing. We had 17 FTEs in teaching staff. That was a 6% reduction in teaching staff. We had 4 FTEs in administration. That was a 13% reduction in the administrative staff. And that is where we are currently. That is our staff right now. And so We have done a very good job. Mr. Culler has done a very good job for next year, making sure that we're not adding FTEs. We are in deficit spending. When you're in deficit spending, in my mind, it's irresponsible to look at ads. You have to make sure that you're managing the store and being fiscally responsible. The last slide I put in here is questions that I would hear is, well, why do we need to add administrator? What do they do? And so the administrative positions, you saw that there was a 13% reduction. The first one under there, the Director of Communications and Community Engagement, Andrew, that position was not part of the data that I just gave you. That position was not eliminated. When there was a resignation, it was filled through the Hamilton County ESC, which is where Andrew worked through at the beginning of this year. We were able to move the position into a Loveland employee at a neutral cost, so cost neutral. And we were able to get Andrew to work from 180 days to now 260. So thank you, Andrew, for adding 80 days to your day. And that was cost neutral. It is an administrative position. It's a position that administrators, you're able to get more work and more hours, plain and simple. And that in my mind, when you look at, we have an entire goal based on communications and community engagement. So that is a position that is necessary. When you look at the Director of Technology and Innovation, it is an industry standard position. If you go to any of the districts around us, you're going to find they either have a coordinator or a director. We've got a coordinator, which is a position that all of the districts are going to have because we invest so much in technology. And when I say technology, not only is it devices, it's also software. So the individual coming in, Adam will come in, he'll do a review of the software. If you have 2 or 3 softwares that are not needed, that maybe are duplicated, you've already saved a lot of money. And so when you have $5 million in assets with technology, it's important that we have somebody looking over that. We were able to take a teaching position that was retiring, that our class sizes were not being affected. That's always what we're going to look at first, our class sizes. We were able to take that teaching position that was being a retired teacher and able to shift that FTE over into our coordinator of technology, thus able to make it cost neutral. Our assistant superintendent, unfortunately, Mrs. Connor is moving to a different district, but the assistant superintendent position, the individual that we hired there, we were able to keep cost neutral. That was not an increase. It was simply a position that is needed. Our assistant superintendent does a lot here in Loveland. They do K through 12 curriculum. They do our federal grants, state funding. They were overseeing technology. They will still oversee the coordinator of technology. There's a lot of responsibility when you talk about K through 12 curriculum with one person in a district our size. That's quite a bit. And so I thought it was important to review when we look at the strategic vision. I'm excited to get started. I want to make sure that we're fiscally responsible in all of it. The first year, like I said, it's not a matter of adding anything. It's a matter of reviewing where we are. If Mr. Knapp, another, just going back to that example, if he says, hey, the web program is what I would really like to do. It's how much does it cost? Who's going to do it? And is it good for kids? And is it on the strategic vision? And so I'm excited that we have the strategic vision process completed. I'm confident that every community member, every stakeholder that wanted to participate had the opportunity to participate. And I appreciate the board giving us some suggestions on how to do that. And I think we've landed on a very good document. And now it's time to kind of put the meat on the bone in terms of what are our action steps going to be, because now we know what our community feels is important. And so with that, I will say thank you to all the members of the design team that donated their time and suggestions. And it was great conversation. It was respectful conversation. It was based on kids, which is what we all want to do, is make sure we're doing good things for kids. So, do I have one more slide?
You mentioned it already, but it's where you make specific that it's one FTE additional.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, we'll I apologize. So the student support positions that we have, we did add 2.5 additional reading specialists, completely paid with the ESSER funds. Okay, and so
Right.
with the ESSER funds,
Flip it.
we're able to
You want to
support.
flip it so we can,
Now I can click it.
yes,
Thank you.
maybe.
All right,
There
we
you
got it. All right. So we were able to add 2.5 additional reading specialists. What we believe is there's a little bit of a COVID gap when it comes to reading. So we were able to make it a little bit more robust when you talk about the elementary. And thank you, sir. Number two additional paraprofessional positions, again, paid with ESSER funds. And that will be both of those, 1 and 2. We will eliminate those once ESSER funds go away, not this year, not this coming year, but the year after. All-day kindergarten, we are looking at 2 additional positions. We're excited. We have quite a few families that are taking advantage of the full-day kindergarten. Those 2 additional positions are going to be cost neutral due to the tuition that will be charged to the families. Full day kindergarten does pay tuition. We have an ELL professional position paid with ESSER funds. And again, it will be eliminated. That is English learners, and that is something that we do have to provide. Having the ESSER funds, we're able to do it through those. And number 5 is the one I've already hit. We do have a paraprofessional. That will be the 1 additional FTE that we must do due to state requirements for a special ed student. So with that, I apologize, I missed that last slide. But with that, I ask that the board accept the 5-year strategic vision, or if you have any questions, please feel free. Yes.
3 points, Mike. You talked about the discipline of adhering to the plan going forward. If somebody comes up with a great idea, doesn't fit in the plan, okay, we can talk about it. Doesn't fit in the plan, we can't talk about it. But kind of the reality of the world is that you write a plan knowing what you know at that point in time. World changes, something comes up, you kind of like it and you can see the sense of doing it. How will you stay disciplined still? How do you change the plan when you need to change the
Yeah,
plan?
great question. I would think you would look at it. I would not, I don't want to say ever. I'm not a fan of changing in the middle of a year, right? So we put everything into our school improvement plans, which is building specific at the end of the year. And we meet monthly with each building administrator, but at the end of that year, take a look, the 5-year strategic vision, you've got 4 more years coming. That's where we're going to say, you know what, that didn't really work. I think maybe we can eliminate that so we can add this. So that in my mind, that is where it's going to happen. When you start off the school year to try and change midstream is difficult. And I think even when you look to add a program, it takes planning, and you have to be strategic about who's going to do it and who's going to pay for it. How's it going to help kids, and where's it fit in here? And if it's good, so to your point, if it fits the first 3 criteria, but it's not in here at the end of the year, maybe we need to put it in here, but what are we taking out?
Okay, I think it's just important to, realize this kind of thing can happen and that you have a process dealing with it. Let me just get through the other 2. The second one relates to busing, and you said it 2 or 3 times. I want to say it a 4th time so everybody understands it, which is that even if we had the money, it's not a go until we can also get the human resources, the drivers to make it happen. And that means that if we could do it financially, there could be some variations on what it looks like.
Yeah, I hesitate to even discuss it because of that, but I think it's important that we are, out in the open about that if the funds are there, it's still only meeting one of the constraints. The driver shortage, which we changed our starting times due to, is still there. If we're able to eliminate that, then we've met both constraints, but 100%.
Great. I'm going to bet all of us would like to do it, but all those factors have to come to play. Third one and final one is just maybe to push home another related point. The administrative position that was funded through a retiring teacher. Some people may say, do administrators and teachers equal same compensation packages? And I know from some of the stuff that we've been involved in that not all teachers are the same. And a retiring teacher is likely to be the most expensive from a total compensation package perspective. And I'm assuming what you're saying there is that when you added all of that stuff together, you were able to make the admin position work.
Correct. And you're 100% correct. First thing we look at is class size and being able to offer what we need to offer. And so that's the first criteria. Our class sizes are really, really good. The second thing is when we interview, and Collier's done a great job, and our building administrators, there are some positions that we're not looking for the 15-year, 20-year veteran. We're looking for what fits our need. And the individual that would be the coordinator of technology and innovation is a young gentleman who, that's why it can be cost neutral when you start talking about a teacher and administrator, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I just want to make sure we were on the same wavelength and that we communicate that one
Thanks.
well to everybody. I'm done.
I have two things, Mike, if you don't mind. Number one is, and I don't need an answer to this evening, but want to make certain that you are making plans for the pre-K through 12 nature of this plan. Gave us some great examples for the pathways and the partnerships, and working with Mr. Mitchell, she gave some examples of how that filters down to the middle school. But even that pathways and partnerships is in the plan as a PK through 12. And so if you have some thoughts this evening, it's fine about how the action plan will actually be sure to carry through all the levels. Or if you want to think about it, and as this begins to work out, you report back to the board on it, that's fine. It's just that I think our audience needs to understand that this is a complete Loveland Schools plan, and high school busing is very, very important. Pathways and partnerships for high school kids are very, very important, but with a lot of aspects of this plan have a lot to do with our very youngest learners.
That's a great point. I'll give you one response. Is meeting with Bruce Mitchell's today, we talked about that very thing, that pathways is pretty heavy on the upper level. What gets done K through 12, there's and Bruce went through everything we do with career day. We have a career day down at the LPS, and there's a couple of individuals down there that oversee what's going on with careers. And obviously it's not hit as specific, but there is some career development. And so to your point, it's a great point, making sure that all of our parents know that we're looking at it K through 12. What I would say also in response is there's a strategy in here about continuity, and continuity that's all K through 12. And so the continuity of, again, I know we're hitting career pathways, and that's one example I picked, but even with that, to have continuity, you have to have one person that's overseeing that program so they can see the whole picture. Somebody who's doing career day at third grade doesn't know what's happening at the high school with careers. So one person overseeing it allows for the continuity. That's just one example of the question, but it's a great question.
And my second point was, you mentioned at the very end of your presentation, the acceptance by the board of this strategic vision. And I know we've gone through, you went through the process, we went through, showcased it for the public this evening. And so my question is, should there be an action item on the agenda that, is a resolution of the board to accept it? Or is it sufficient that it shows in the agenda? I think it's very useful for going forward with this, that there's a point in time at which this vision plan is accepted. And maybe it's helpful to have a resolution that the board supports, saying that they've seen it, they've discussed it, and they accept this. It's not, the board didn't create this, the board isn't decreeing it, it's an acceptance of the plan that the group built for us.
Well, I think it's a great idea. I would defer to the board. What I can tell you is what I'm looking for is the board stamp of approval moving forward. This is what we want to do. And so if you believe that's a board resolution, then we could do that at the next board meeting, and or whenever you would like. So.
Yeah. You're shaking your head at me, Mr. Giuffre. I believe we could add a resolution to this agenda because it is a subject of the special meeting, but I also think it's fine if you want to put it on the regular business meeting as a resolution. I think that's fine as well. It's up to the board.
My suggestion would be the regular business meeting. Notice. It's
Fine.
under consideration.
Okay.
Yep.
So if we could get that on the agenda.
You
All
bet.
right. Any other board members with questions about the strategic vision? or thoughts? Or
I don't have any questions, but I do have a thought, and I want to say that I'm very impressed with how you built the process and shepherded us through the process. Going back, we started talking about it in January. We kicked it off in February. It's been 4 months of gathering input from the community. And I hope that that's a sign to the community that we're very interested in everybody's opinion and how valuable our children are to all of us. So I'm really impressed with it. I hope that we can pull off everything that we want to. And I look forward to seeing the action plan and how we develop those thoughts into plans and strategies to move us forward.
Great, thank you.
anyone else? I'll add on to that, just for the purposes of people who are looking at this online or virtually, I will note that we do have some members of the design team here in attendance. I'm not going to call out names because I'll miss people, even those who are sitting here, but I think we should take this opportunity to thank all of the people who, not just the people who contributed with surveys and those kinds of things, but the people who spent that time, the writing team, and they gave up time to come in and consider all this, and all the people who came to the meetings and gave their input, and the team that put that all together. It really is a tremendous amount of work, and we're very appreciative of it.
Yeah, I can just echo that, having worked with that team. I think it is a testament process that folks are here, because it was a really large group that came together, but yet I think there's enough investment because it was a collaborative process that folks have a sense of ownership of this from within that group. And that's one of the things we're really counting on in terms of communication out into the community, that those folks are a part of that process are going to help us to communicate this out into the community so that the whole community can get excited about, own this vision for our schools, and help us to begin to put some meat on these goals, particularly the community aspect of it. There's so much of this that is not simply about what happens in our schools. It's about the partnership between our community and the schools. And so the more creative and more excitement we can bring around those aspects of it, the more involvement we're going to have from the community, the more successful the plan is going to be.
Anything else? I'll just make a personal statement at this point. I am not able to be at the June 14th meeting, the meeting next week, but certainly I am very impressed with this strategic vision, and were I able to be here, I would be voting on it. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right, I know the clicker, Mr. Broadwater, you have anything else for us this evening?
I believe that was my last slide.
I think that the clicker was taken away from
It
you,
was.
has
It was.
moved to the next part of the agenda. I think that's why it moved. And so the next item on our agenda is a discussion of district finances, revenues, and resources. And so the clicker has moved to Mr. Giuffre, and I will turn the table over to him.
Thank you. I'm going to start. I'm not a very thoughtful kind of person, so I want to start by thanking the Finance Committee, the Planning Commission, for taking the time, not only on their own efforts to provide us with some great insights on aspects of our finances, but also to take the time to listen, to reflect, to ask questions, and about state funding, and also to join us on the forecast presentation in the fall with the Business Advisory Committee. And the thoughtful input that they provided has been very welcoming. And there's not a lot of people that want to talk about this stuff. So it's wonderful when you have smart people that are willing to give their input. So I want to thank them before I get started. So I have 12 slides. And as I get started, I just want to tell anyone who's at home and here, these are really tiny numbers on that screen. Even though it's a huge screen, really tiny. But they are in the public section in board docs. There are notes that coincide with the slides, and pretty much what I'm going to say, but maybe not verbatim. So as I go through this, and after I've gone through this, you can go back and compare the notes for the slides. And then, of course, if you have any questions, my contact information is on our website.
Rob, would you prefer we hold our questions until you're done, or ask them as you go along?
I think it'd probably help me stay focused in messaging, but I think I'm pretty grounded. I think I can handle whatever you bring. I just want to orient to the information and then show the connection to the solution primarily, but I think would be fine. Yeah. So I'm going to start with just orientation of this model. This is the Department of Education, shared kind of with the Auditor State's Office, but Department of Education forecast. The forecast has 3 years historical, 4 years projected, and currently we are in this year with 1 month left. And just to give you an idea of what our tolerances are, we're within $28,000 on revenue on 52 million. And we're within 0.25% on expenditures. And that number is 114,000 out of 52 million. So we're coming in currently right where we had projected that we needed to be at this point in time with 1 month left. What I really want to draw your attention to, though, are these two lines, the blue line and the ending balance. We often focus on the ending balance, and that's pretty much where everyone's eyes go to. They go right down to the bottom, but it truly is, and that is the this is the beginning balance for the year, and this is the ending balance here. But it is this line that gives us the heads up well in advance of the ending balance. If we wait for the ending balance to speak to us, it's probably going to be later than it should be. As soon as we see deficit spending, we need to react to it. And now, at this point in time, this is really alarming when you look at inflation. These are numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And again, it's a lot easier to see online, but we have February year over year and March year over year. And so our numbers for the month of May should be coming in June 10th, but we see here that we are in the neighborhood of on energy cost 25%, on food cost 8 to 9%, and on all other items about 7 to 8%. And that is 1 month. Then 1 month later, we're looking at numbers that are at 30%, that are 10, that are at 9%. So we haven't seen it capped out yet. And that's alarming because down here, there was an article that came out on the 30th of May. It was updated on the 2nd of June. And it says in this article, and it's really worth the read, that the Fed really missed the mark. They were saying it's a temporary inflationary. And of course, you know, they didn't see the war coming in the Ukraine, but in December of 2021, we were already at a 40-year high in inflation at 6.8%, a 40-year high. So we really have known we've had a problem for a while, but it was really softly spoken by the Feds, kind of saying that this is a temporary thing, it'll be okay, no problems. And then all of a sudden, we started going to the gas station and realized that things were not the same. And so what I want to do is I just want to compare 2022 to 2023 on expenditures. And these numbers, again, are small, but you can see them in the forecast. And here I'm using them to compare with percentages. So Mike just went through a lot of what's in salaries, the differences there. You have your steps and cost of living, but we also have at least one administrator, one purchase service person who normally who was on this line down here, moving up into salaries. We have an additional admin and the other positions that Mike talked about. We also built in 2 certified staff positions. Not that they will be filled, but they are there if we need them, because sometimes needs overrules means, and we have to be able to have the capacity to fill those needs. In insurance, we just experienced, we will be experiencing on the 1st of July, an 8% increase in health insurance. Now, fortunately, that's what I budget for, because 1 year it might be 2%, the next year it might be 20%, but on average, it's in the neighborhood of 8%, and that's exactly what it was this year. I think the numbers actually said it should have been, the actuarial numbers said it should have been 11.9. So the consortium that we use held off on those expenditures. But overall, that percentage increase between salaries and insurance, 5.35 and 5%. In purchase services I'm going to start by bragging about our business manager who had the discipline. I said this last month, but he purchased futures contracts for this district for gas and electric. If he hadn't done that, the upside, we don't know where it's at yet. We haven't seen this upside for quite some time. But he certainly did the district a service by making sure that we had those contracts in place. Sometimes they're in place and we may not save money, but the downside is minimal compared to what the upside could be if you don't have that protection in place. On purchase services, there is an increase and it says it's 9.12%, but I'm here to tell you that it's 33% less than 2019, because in 2020, we all went home. And so we stopped spending money on supplies because the children went home. In 2021, we were not here very much of the year. And so those supplies were not as much. And also a lot of those supplies may have been afforded by ESSER funds, but as they come back into 2023, it's still 33% below 2019. So don't be alarmed by a 9% increase there. The one thing I do want to point out down here, and you'll see this on the forecast, is this is a contingency line item. It's not been part of our process before, but I think that we can all agree that we really could use a white line before we hit the guardrail when it comes to making sure that we have taken into consideration the unexpected. This has become, in my mind, this has become a lot more important of a line item. We would hope that we don't have to spend it. We do not spend it from this, from where it is. It would be reallocated to whatever line item, budgetary line item it would be needed. But there are times where things come along that we're not expecting. I think the past couple of years has demonstrated that quite well. Our hope is not to spend it. It's only in 2023. It's not every year, but in 2023, there's 3%. Well, it's just under 3%, 1.6, let's say. There, if it is needed budgetarily for expenditures that come along that are outside of what we have projected in our expenditures. Are there any questions at this point?
Rob, that's a 3%.
It is just under 3%, 2.694%, yes. Based upon the expenditures for 2023, yes. Rounding to 3. The other thing about this is starting with these expenditures, then when we're looking at what our needs are, we're using apples to apples as we go forward and take a look at our.
So before you move on, Rob.
Yes.
Just trying to get formulated in my head. I don't want to confuse everybody with one thing. Mike had talked about kind of specifically headcount and how tightly we control it. And the mechanism by which you would control it going forward. In this document, when we talk about a couple of FTEs and the non-recurring contingency amount, this is a proposed forecast to be used for the rest of our discussion going through this evening.
It was filed in May. And by November, we'll know more things, but it is what we filed.
Okay, so the contingency was in the May
Yes,
number? Okay.
it was. And I've always used that. I find it to be very helpful to avoid having someone walk in on the 6th day of the budget year and tell me that they forgot something. It gives us the ability to be flexible, but
Yeah.
the goal is not to spend it.
Right. Well, every CFO that I've known in the business world has had a contingency somewhere. Normally, people didn't know that it existed, but their job, first and foremost, was not to run out of cash.
Right.
So there was always some insurance fund someplace. And, you know, from a managing the business perspective, I think it's a really smart thing to do from the perspective of people getting the idea that there's $1.5 million out there that we can always grab if, you know, there's something new that we wanted to do. I think that would be the wrong way to think about it.
Well, I also think that, to your point, if you're using the ending balance for that, then you got a moving target. We don't want the ending balance to move. So we want to make sure that we're going to land where we know we're going to land because we're relying upon that information going forward and the revenues over under expenditures.
Okay.
The point you had made about the 2 FTEs, and Garth probably gets tired of me saying FTEs, but it's part of everyday life. That's what we watch. The two FTEs, I'll give you a perfect example, are our full day kindergarten. Our numbers are pretty good. So if those numbers increase to where those kindergarten students the following year move into first grade, and we've got a class size, and class size will be always be the number one factor. Right now, when you're in deficit spending, it's very difficult to add FTEs, but it's something that you need to do when you're talking about class size. So you have certain variations, especially in the elementaries. You have a large group and a smaller group, making sure that you're able to manage class size.
So let me say what I said to Rob, maybe just a little bit differently.
Okay.
So I maybe make the point I was really trying to focus on, and that's that we're going to look at forecasts that have no increase in revenue. And then I think we're going to look at some forecasts that have some ideas about increases in revenue. But irrespective, what I heard you say before is that you manage things like hiring based on how much money you actually have.
Yes.
And if you don't have the money to do something incremental, you live within the means and you try to find ways to reallocate resources to
Yes.
more pressing areas.
Another perfect example, yes, is, and Garth has the exact number, but with the resignations and retirements versus the individuals that were hired to replace, it's over $500,000 savings because of being strategic about who we're hiring and where they are on the pay scale. And so it is all, to me, that is what drives school finance, is FTEs.
Right. And last point on this slide, and then I'll be quiet until you can say I can speak again. But I've been spending some time going over inflation data.
Yes.
And in my old world, we used to fixate on this thing because it really had a lot to do with the core of the business. But one of the things that hit me is that we've got unbelievable inflation right now. And inflation has a way of curing itself over the course of time. We're not likely to see a lot of year over year over year of 8%ers. But part of the reality is that, except for a few points in history, we don't generally deflate. We don't go back to where we were.
Right.
And that's that's both a problem and an important point to keep in mind when you think about the impact on household disposable income. That, it's 8% this year. Let's say, for the sake of argument, we go to 3% next year. It's not likely we're going to see -2 or -1 or negative any. We might, but unlikely. And therefore, the base of expenses that people are paying, just generally speaking, always continues to go up. We're just going to be, this year, what we're doing is giving it a big bump up, and then we'll continue at a lesser rate, but still an increasing rate likely going forward.
Right. And it impacts everything, which depending on who owns whatever it is that's going up, could be a good thing, which I'm going to show in one of the slides coming up. So
That's why we fixate on
Right.
the real world.
well, you have to. So just as this forecast is dictated by the Department of Education, I'm also going to show you something else that's dictated by the Department of Education. But one slide before that is I'm going to show you a graphic of line 6.010, which is revenues over or above expenditures. And that graphic looks like this. So our current year, we're going to break even. And then we're deficit spend in the next year. Hopefully not this much, because we have our contingency built into this, but we begin that trend. And I will illustrate how important it is to capture this before it begins in that decline. And in doing so, the Department of Education has come up with this model that they oversee, and it has 3 levels. Well, 4 actually. If you're up here, you're fine. But once you get down into the yellow, it is caution. And then down in here, the pink is warning, and down here is emergency. And as you may have seen at districts that border this district, if you get into that area, they will come in and they will take over your finances, and they will tell the board what they can and cannot. And and then you end up paying back whatever it is that, when it goes bad. We don't want to talk about that, but that's what this model is for them to be able to monitor districts that either lose control or do not take action in order to be able to take care of their debt spending. And so here's 23, we're in warning in 23, and it's a combination of those two numbers. It's the revenues over or under, it's the ending balance. And it is a straightforward math calculation. I can show it to you. There's a lot of numbers to go through to create this algorithm. But once we get to 23, they're looking 2 years out, and 2 years out, we're down into the warning area, and they will call you and say, what are you going to do? And you're telling them at that time, we're either going to, put a levy on, or we're going to do something. You've got to have some justification or reason what the plan is for the district. And then this is what the life expectancy of the current levy looks like. And the reason I put that up here is because I want to show you what it compares to with regards to resolution or solution. This slide is truly for folks to give you just different perspectives of dollars and cents. It shows the revenues over and under. It shows the number of days of cash on hand based upon the spending. And down here are a number of just information, like this is how much 1/2 year of tax collections is. And this is how much 2 months of payroll is. And I want to reference that in a second. And then this is 1/12 of spending. So we know that we're spending $4.6 million a month. That's the cash flow. That is more regular than the revenue. The revenue, though, doesn't come in the same, because the revenue doesn't come in the same way as expenditures. We have to keep our eye on the revenues as we're going forward. So this is a bar chart of what that looks like on monthly balances. And so we can see that our low points are January's. And so if we've got nearly $7.6 million in 2 months worth of pay, and right here we're expecting we're expecting advances on our taxes, and they don't always come in January, and we get too low in our cash, we could have a challenge making payroll, and that would require us to go out for tax anticipation notes. So that really is what when we're basing our need on cash flow, when we talk about deficit spending, this is a component of it, and also part of what the Department of Education is looking at. And again, you can see that better on board docs. So just in review, very quickly, because I'm going to be, if I can keep this mouse under control, it is these two numbers, revenues over or under and ending balances, that we're looking at. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get a 3-year period where our total over under is 0 or very close to 0, so that we're not deficit spending. As soon as we begin to deficit spend, and I will show you this in a second, it becomes much harder to catch up. And so this, in order for us to be able to break even on that line, 4.9 mils would be the number that would get us through the next 3 years at a non-deficit spending. Now that right there is about $225,000 negative, which on $170 million, that's a goose egg. So 4.9 mils is currently what the superintendent and I are recommending the board consider. And I want to show you why now, because I think that's the question that most folks would say, well, if you're not deficit spending now, why wouldn't you wait? And so this, there's two different messages here that are both saying the same thing. This one is showing a 4.9 mil levy that starts in 2023 being collected. So a 2022 November ballot issue, November 8th, passes, and we start collecting money in January of 2023 to offset the deficit spending for that fiscal year, the fiscal year that we enter into on January 1 or on July 1st. So we only get 6 months of revenues in fiscal year 2023 because we're 6 months beyond by the time we get to January. If we don't pass it for 1 year, the difference is extraordinary for the same millage, because we have one less year to live with it. We have one less year before it comes in, because we're trying to take care of deficit spending for 2 years, because we don't see dime one until the 2024 January collection period. So this, again, using the bar chart on monthly projections over a 3-year period of time, this makes it a little more clear. even though it's tiny. So in the first 6 months or the last 6 months of this calendar year, everything's the same. Expenditures are the same. That's why we started with that benchmark expenditures from the May forecast. But with each one, 2022 or 2023 passage for collection in 2023-24, we have the same ending balances for those 6 months. In January of 2024, we start seeing or 23, we see the first collections come in for a 22 levy, and we see those collections affect the ending balance all through calendar year 2023. In January of 2024, we began to see on the far bar on the right-hand side, a 2023 levy being collected in 2024. And the thing that this shows, as well as this up here, is that it never catches up. It never comes close to catching up to the 2022 levy. And we end up deficit spending within 2 years. And so not a threat, just a fact, the way the numbers work. It is $1.25 million to $1.5 million in order, if we wait until 2023 levy, to be able to match what we are able to do with a 4.9 in 2022 levy, operating levy. So with that, and this is something that really surprised me, I went out to, how much is this going to cost question? I kind of did a double thing here. I went out and I used the average home value in Loveland from 2014 to 2022. And I was so surprised by the incredible, I don't know why I am, but I just am, the incredible increase. And so along each one of these lines, I pegged the values in order for us to see what it would cost. And in a homeowner of a valued home of, down here, it's 215,000. If I'm not mistaken, I'll scroll down so I can see it on my screen. Yeah, 215,000 was the average cost of a home in Loveland in 2014. And in 2023, we are at 364. And that is a 56% increase in the average value of a home. And in that period of time, there have been no revenues that the school district has received as a result of that value growth, except for inside mills. Inside mills is 4.56. It's not subject to reduction factors. And with that, it's the growth overall from 2014 to 2023, 2022 actually, we've gone up 260 million in assessed. That's $1.185 million. That's how much revenue the district has realized in that growth of home values. Just that's the way it is. That's the way the numbers work.
What is inside mills?
Inside mills. So originally, before all the voted millage, there were inside mills. There used to be 15. And back during the Great Depression, they took the values from 1929 to 1934, and they reduced the 15 down to 10. So if a political subdivision didn't exist back then, they didn't get any of it. But the inside mills are not reduced by any growth. So you receive full value increase for that. Our portion of that pie, because back then there would have been, there's the county and the cities and any municipality that existed, they receive a portion of that. Loveland schools and 3 counties and all political subdivisions receive 4.56 inside. So those receive that increased value. But that's how much it equates to, was about $1.2 million over the past 8 years.
Not 1.2 annually, 1.2
overall.
total.
Yes. So, and every 3 years, we have either a triennial update or a sexennial update, a reappraisal, sexennial reappraisal, triennial update. And so with that, the value or the cost to homeowner is on this sheet, and it is out on board docs, but I'll go from the end down here, a $215,000 house on a 4.9 mil levy would equate to $368.73 a year, or $30.73 a month. For a $350,000 home, the cost of a 4.9 mil levy would be $600 annually, or a monthly of $50 a month. So that's what the impact is to the homeowner for a 4.9 mil levy. And the last slide I want to show you is these are millage rates for Loveland City Schools. And currently our millage rate is lower than it's been in over a decade. And even with a 4.9 mil levy, it still won't come up to where 2014 was when that 5.6 mil levy passed.
Rob, can you just, because you're talking because of inflationary growth or because things have dropped off?
Inflationary, as the home values go up, the millage goes down. It's an inverse relation. Keep the dollars the same because of House Bill 9.
So practically speaking, the millage has dropped over time.
It has. It absolutely has. Yep.
And House Bill 920 is basically why there is no inflationary adjustment in school finance.
Right. Yes. George Voinovich. So with that, Superintendent and I are making a recommendation to the board to consider a 4.9 mil operating levy to be placed on the ballot in November of 2022. And I included that legislation for you to review, and would like to ask for the first piece of that at the next board meeting on Tuesday, the 14th, to direct me to have the county auditor certify that millage and the amount of money that it would raise for the intent of coming back and at the July 12th meeting of having the board direct me to place it on the ballot with the Board of Elections.
So Rob, I have some questions or comments.
Okay.
So just a few different things. If I go back to your opening slide. And I brought this.
I gotta get one.
Gang.
Does it have a light on it?
I had the electronic version of it, all right. But I, as I'm apt to do, played with some of the numbers here, and I wanted to try to tease out some data from this. But before I do that, one thing I don't think you, excuse me if you did, but I didn't think I heard you mention the state budget situation and how that could potentially impact forecasted revenues. You want to just comment on that? Because I didn't have that here from my notes.
With the state funding, because of the increased, well, I'm going to slide back down because of this, because it really is the reason. Because of this, the state of Ohio is looking at Loveland City Schools going, wow, you are a very wealthy district. And those numbers are direct calculations into the per student assessed valuation, along with income. Those two numbers then create the calculation that has put the district on the guarantee. We will never be off the guarantee. Currently calculated the value per, or the amount of money per student. If we were a formula district, $341 a student, we're receiving $3,000 a student, and hopefully that will continue.
And the hopefully is really the part of my question I'm trying to zero in
The
on.
liability.
At what point are we at risk? Remind me.
It's a biennium budget, so the end of the next calendar year, they go
End of
back and
23.
decide what they want to guarantee, if anything.
That's the end of 23 then. So 24, 5, and 6.
The model that is out there is a 6-year implementation. This is the first year. And so as they phase in, the districts that are formula districts will receive more and more money, and they got to get it from somewhere.
Right. So the line on our revenues that would be affected is the unrestricted state grants.
Yes,
Okay.
restricted
Those of
and
you that-
unrestricted, yes.
For those of you that can't, that didn't bring your own magnifying
middle.
glasses. If I
These
look at 2026, the top line, which is our property taxes, our local property taxes,
Yes,
is forecasted to be 32 million. The state grants and aid is the second largest source of revenue at 13.3 million.
yes,
And then we have a few other categories that eventually build us up to a total revenue of 53 million.
yes.
So one of the things I looked at was, because we have some ups and downs in these various years, and trying to get a handle on what's really happening with revenues and expenses. And tell me if this sounds correct to you. It looks to me like all in on the revenue side, we have a compounded annual growth rate from 19 through 26, forecasted 26, of 1.07% per year. So in other words, all of our publicly sourced revenues are growing just over 1%
Yeah.
per year.
Mhm.
And that kind of substantiates what I believed and have said to many people over the years, that from a revenue perspective, we live on a very fixed income.
Right. We don't have any inflationary based revenue streams at all.
Right, not at this time.
Right.
But consistent, Mike, with the strategic plan, one of the things that you've pointed out in there is the need to try to find alternative streams of financing, working with the public, with private industry and
Right.
grants and other sources potentially.
And even so much as when you look at full day kindergarten, figuring out that's an
Tuition.
alternative funding source that's takes care of 12 FTEs.
Okay,
Um,
but what we can guarantee is through really only 23, what our revenue is going to be. And hopefully, if the state doesn't change things too much, we could hopefully guarantee the few years beyond that. But reinforcing the point that we only go up about a percentage point a year. And that is a constriction on the thing. The other major area I focused in on was total expenditures, and you can dive down into the components that you have up there. But total expenditures have grown or are forecasted to grow despite the things that we talked about in, I guess it was 23, the incremental items potentially in 23. Overall, we grow 1.94% per year. So our expenditures are growing just under 2% per year.
You go back to what the revenues were growing?
1% on revenues, 2% on expenditures. And I know, I mean, I've said it in this room more than once, live within our means, but I would tell you, I did this kind of stuff for 40 years and holding it to 2% per year is a pretty good job. That is really pretty well done. And I think, the concern that I have is that, yeah, you can continue to do that. But at a point, you start to run into what I mentioned at our last meeting, that you get to the point where in order to do that, in order to live within your means, you have to start to violate the reason that you're here. Now, certainly there's times of, emergencies and national issues and whatnot, where I think all of us would say it is what it is, just tighten the belt and get by. But we are at a point, or are going to be at a point in the foreseeable future, where we won't be able to deliver what we're delivering today. And that leads me to a question for you. If you had to replace a levy or delay a levy, what's the real world implication of it versus, running out of cash next January or the following January? What do you think would be what we would have to do? Well, you don't have busing to cut anymore. So how would we start to see it and feel it? What would we do?
Well, to me, when you say live within your means, we all want to do that. None of us like doing any of this. When you live within your means, that means revenues and expenditures are at least equal, right? When revenues don't change, for expenditures not to change, that means you either have less people or you're not giving any cost of living adjustment to your employees, because that's the majority of our expenses. So to me, the reason I outlined the nearly 50 FTE reductions and the reduction in high school busing, it's not to add. It's just to understand that the institution is running pretty lean. We've done a very good job of not touching the classroom such that the class sizes are really, really, really good. So to me, that means we've done a good job of not touching teachers and what we do in the classroom. If you talk about expenditures, when you have inflation coming, I'm not sure you're going to be able to control expenditures on diesel fuel and food and all that. The expenditures are going to be people. And that means you either have less people or.
That's really what I'm getting at, Mike.
Yeah.
What are some of the numbers? I know 3.5 has been kicked around. And look back in our levy history, and we seem to like 3.5 a number
Yes.
of times over, many years in the past. So, and I think somebody said that there's a version at 3.5 just to keep your head above water. So that's $3.5 million, if I understand the math right.
Yeah.
Every mill is about $1 million, we're saying. So $3.5 million. So if we had to find $3.5 million in a given year, let's say it's not that bad. Let's find half of that. What would that start to look like to us?
1.5 million. You're talking the average employee is probably at about 70, so that puts you at about 15 to 20 employees, I would think, depending on the type of employee and the pay scale. Because when you look at discretionary funds, the Hamilton County contract, for example, 5% increase every year. That's what their default is. Okay. And so it's the same when you look at diesel fuel, food. We don't have many expenses that are discretionary where we get to make selections of the curriculum is driven by state standards. So when you talk about reductions, look at what was done the last time. It was basically people, right? And so when you're looking at 1.5 million, you'd have to take a very close look at all the processes and procedures. But at the end of the day, I don't know how it would not mean.
I'm
Well,
just
one of
trying
the
to
things
put it.
you've said about, you've said a number of times, we're really good on class size. And when you
Yes.
say that, what you're describing is we are at a fiscally responsible place for
Yes.
class sizes.
Yes.
So we're right in the kind of the sweet spot. But it doesn't mean we're on the low end where
Correct.
we've got lots of room to spare. So what you're saying is if we had to reduce our expenditures in terms of our FTEs, now we're going to come to a place where now we're on the very high side for class size, where we're going to start to see what you were talking about, reduction in the effectiveness of our classroom instruction because we've got that many.
Yes.
We know that
See, part of the challenge I've been trying to work my way through in these numbers is I took Rob's spreadsheet and I took out the contingency number, the $1.5 million. And I looked at how that changed our low cash balance month. And the fact is it did change it by about $1.5 million, but we were already in trouble. And it didn't change it was another $1.5 million we couldn't make payroll by kind of issue. So the numbers, once inflation has grown your cost base, it's kind of what I was saying before about consumer inflation. Once our inflation has started to cost as much as it does, the kinds of changes that you have to make become more impactful and more impactful. You've got to find bigger numbers. Could we cut administrative benefits? Yeah, okay, maybe we could find a way to cut administrative benefits. But I'm not sure that anything practical in that respect is enough to make a meaningful difference on when we run out of cash. And that's the kind of stuff I was trying to get a better handle on. And I still don't know what that might look like, but as I think about the pain of doing this thing, and I hate this discussion. I've known for a long time it's coming. I've been telling the community for a long time that I can see it in the future. And the numbers are starting to tell me that the day of reckoning is, much closer than it was a couple of years ago. we're going to have to probably do something. And I think about this being kind of a horrible time to talk about it because, you know, the inflation numbers that I'm looking at are suggesting, these are government numbers, are suggesting average households, $300 to $400 per month is what the current inflation is costing American households. And I was a little bit relieved in one sense to see a 4.9 equating to 50, 60 bucks a month, maybe more depending on the value of your home, right?
Right.
So it wasn't as bad as I was afraid it was going to be, but
40,
it's
50.
already on top of hundreds of dollars. And part of the, you know, I was thinking about timing on this. There's a part of me that says, oh, hell, excuse me. Oh, heck.
We feel the same
But
way.
that just slipped right out of there. I don't know where that came from. But, oh my God, I wouldn't, you know, this is not the time, given this inflationary environment, that I'd want to be talking about a levy. But then I thought through it and said, well, it doesn't get any better down the road. Not only does the millage that you need grow to kind of keep you even, but even if we drop from 8% to 3%, the 8% is still underneath the new 3%.
Right.
So it's not like all of a sudden everybody, you know, has extra cash laying around.
To your point, you can't wait it out.
You can't, it just gets worse. So
Well, and then let me go,
Yeah.
Rob, I had a question on slide 8. I don't know if you can get us back to that. Because as I'm looking through this and, you know, we're talking about the strategic vision and we've talked about the loss of busing, we've talked about the loss of music programs. A 4.9 mil levy kind of keeps us treading water rather than the ability to add much in the way of programs. Am I reading that correctly?
Well, in the expenditure assumptions, I'm not being conservative, I'm not being aggressive, I'm being realistic. So those expenditure assumptions have in it what we will likely spend. And so it's, it only I mean, as far as being able to do additional things, as Mike said, got to come from someplace else. But these numbers represent salaries, reasonable salary increases with insurances that are historical trend data. So we're using 5 years of history to come up with the next 3 years of reality or 4 or 5 years of reality. So it's realistic. And I think that the other part of that is that where we're hiring, for example, I believe at this point in time, we're bringing teachers on at a, you know, lower on the steps. And so and we've got a very mature staff, so there will be turnover. And we will need to capture some of that opportunity for additional program or transportation or whatever the strategic visioning process has led us to.
Yeah, if I were to give a simple answer there, I think we're pretty good about being creative and being able to do what we need to do. But as soon as we hit deficit spending, the creativity is gone. It's now we need to protect our classrooms. We need to make sure that the class sizes are appropriate. When you're out of deficit spending, now you can look at our hiring practice, what programs, and they can make a difference, because a lot of what's on the strategic vision, if it's one position, that's not unsurmountable. If you're not in deficit spending, when you're in deficit spending, I don't feel it's fiscally responsible to add anything. I wouldn't do that in my own home budget. I'm not going to put a pool in if I'm not making enough money. So I think sitting down with Mr. Giuffre and talking through this, it was what is it realistically, whether it's a minimum that we can get to where we're not deficit spending. That was the goal in this, because our community has spoken. And there's a part of the community, Kevin, I forget how you said it, but you said it very well. There's a part of our community that it's not all about finances. It is what I like, which is education and providing programs. So what is that? Where do you hit that balance? So that's the difficult part. And that's why these discussions are very, very difficult. But when you're out of deficit spending, creativity can enter what you do. That's why I'm here, is we can do some.
So
Just to reiterate what was just said, because we talk about a lot of things and then we get a little farther away from what, but the budgeting of expenditures, you say it's realistic. It is not budgeting any new programs. It is not budgeting any new classroom teachers above what we have. It is not budgeting new bus drivers that would be needed for if we brought back high school busing. It is taking what we currently spend and realistically looking at what the increases would be for those salaries, those benefits, those insurance costs, those costs for fuel for buses, those kinds of things. And if with that levy that you are recommending, we would not be looking at any change in programming unless we were able to save costs, again, by replacement of teachers, save costs by doing something somewhere within that budget. Is that correct? It's not budgeting anything new. It is taking what we are currently doing and looking at what realistically we could expect to happen
Yes.
with increases.
Yes, and I would say that if it wasn't for this inflationary pressure that we're realizing right now, we might have a different answer. But I, for one, am a retired resident of this community, and we have to take into consideration how challenging it would be for someone on a fixed income. So we're trying to keep it within what is reasonable, but also what will help us to be able to maintain what we currently have at the moment. So if things reside, maybe there'll be an opportunity, or if we're able to take advantage of the attrition of our teachers as they retire and capture some of that. But it is not asking for more than what our expenditures are showing us.
I know, that, ongoing study and figuring this out. Previous conversation we had, I thought at 4.9, there was that potential for busing to be restored. That 3.5, certainly not. That's just maintaining we're at the status quo. But you're saying at 4.9, we don't have any leeway in what we're going to be seeing in terms of additional revenue to be able to restore high school busing.
I think at 4.9, it gives us the flexibility to be able to find means to make that happen. But as Mike said, it comes down to being able to find drivers. These numbers are based upon what we have been staffed.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, drivers obviously an ongoing issue.
the
I think in terms of communicating this to the community
Right.
and what we're saying, what are you going to get when you increase?
So next year, we change start times, which reduces the number of drivers to do what we're currently doing now at a 3-tier level. So having had enough drivers in years past, that's what's driven the expenditures. Again, we're using 5-year historical. So being able to have enough drivers to provide that transportation with the new start time, it sets us up nicely. So there's a strategy that we put in place, anticipating the opportunity to find drivers so that we could put that program back in place. So
can we, because we've, for the sake of the public, we've had finance committee meetings where we've dived a little bit deeper into some of these numbers, and things have been very dynamic here over the days. So I just want to make sure with these last couple of questions that we really are on the same page. My understanding was a little closer to Jonathan's. I thought that the 4.9 gave you some, not a lot, but it gave you some financial flexibility. I thought that you had the potential for a couple of headcount for a couple of years. So maybe 4 or 5 headcount over this whole time period. Not a big massive change in anything, but a little bit of flexibility there, and maybe the flexibility, again, if you could get the staffing put away to do something on busing. And busing could look different, right? It might not be all at once. It might factor in over time,
Right.
and that's part of what made it affordable within this proposal.
right,
Am I saying that right?
it is built in.
So
part
it's
of
a
our
little
number.
different than what Kathy was asking, but it's not phenomenally new programs and
So yes, the FTEs, we had mentioned 2 And being able to, if it's over the course of 3 years, what does that look like? The assumptions were 2, 2, 1, where possibly if the class sizes increase, we have the ability to be flexible. We don't ever want to use them, but if the class sizes increase with the busing, the high school busing, I think we all want to be cautious because the 3-tiered system has now given us the ability, and this is part of the forethinking that we were going through, to go from about 17 drivers needed down to about less than 10. So if that were to hold true, I believe we have the funding for high school busing
With the 4.
in the 4.9. It's difficult because you have the inflation. You also have with the 3 tiers, what does that look like? But that is a deeper dive in making sure that that is available. But in the 4.9, it is my belief we would be able to do it. Yes.
Okay, can I ask?
Where would that show up? Because that wasn't what I was understanding. In other words, if I was hearing 2 FTEs, I wasn't hearing that where would that show up?
So this year, how many drivers are we down since the beginning of the year?
I don't have the exact number, but
We're down 18. So we were paying 18. That's a lot. We were paying 18 drivers. That's part of our historical trend. That is part of our projections going forward.
Okay,
So
so
that's
that
what I mean.
in the historical number.
Yes.
So by adding a percentage to the going forward number, I'm missing somewhere where
So-
those 18 people reside that they show up.
So
That's,
personnel services on this slide
18.
shows 23 over 22, 5.35% growth. And that's not just contracted salary growth. That's embedded in it, but this is much higher than that. So this is accounting for some of those headcount.
okay.
I don't know about all the bus drivers. That's a lot of bus drivers, but I guess you're saying that you've made it work with 18. Garth was the
But
number?
what did you say? The 18 is from 2019 or 20? Right.
Are you thinking though
From the time school
versus a
started.
year ago versus several years ago? The 18.
So
Okay.
from this year, beginning of this year. Number of drivers.
Find out.
Yes. No, but quite a few.
So maybe we're not deciding anything tonight on this front, right? We're discussing this tonight. But this is maybe a subject that we can get clarity on during the course of the week and when we get together next week to talk about the recommendation in the form of a resolution. Maybe we can have that information available to us. Just kind of crystal clarity
was
about
a-
what's there.
This year. Okay.
Would that
Yeah,
cover it?
I mean. Yes,
So-
I had a different understanding of what those numbers were saying, not having been a part of the finance committee discussion. So, okay.
Right.
And I was going off of the 5-year plan for the expenditures, which these numbers have stayed the same. So I just want to be clear, we had to cut a lot of programs. We had to cut a lot of people. A 4.9 mil levy does not suddenly give us grace to hire everybody back and bring back busing. But with creativity and with the bend in salaries by having a mature staff that will be retiring over time, it gives us significantly more flexibility than we have now, which is none, as we're already deficit spending.
And that's the word, flexibility. We have the flexibility to determine where our priorities are based upon all the work that's just been done, so that as we are able to, and I would just tell you that as far as bus drivers goes, I think this year we're down 7.
Actually estimated for what we're going
Right.
And at the very beginning of 2020, we were at 62.
That's incredible. But that number's already in there.
In the base.
We've already paid that as part of our base salary. So if we can replace those drivers, then that trend will carry us through. So that's what I meant by that. We would have enough to be able to with this new tier system.
So the discussions at the finance committee was the ability to replace or bring back high school busing. The constraint is the drivers. So Mr. Jouffre is saying you've got, because of the drivers that have left, it's in the 5-year forecast. I can also say, Garth, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's about $500,000 we saved through attrition with the hiring practices.
We're not done yet. We are not complete with the hiring for being able to in the next school year.
Yeah,
So as those happen, I'll be updating that sheet and updating.
So Garth, cut me off real quick if I start to say something I shouldn't say here, but I won't be offended. But I think want to point out that we had a very difficult, very lengthy negotiation process, particularly with our teachers, our teachers union, and they worked, I would say, very, very well with us to try to deal with the financial challenges in front of the district. And I'm going to keep this high level, but the realization of that work you're starting to see right now.
Twofold. One was that the association was that one piece of it was that that's basically changing the schedule. So we basically were negotiating that the schedule itself would change, i.e. that we're going to be able to save money based upon having a new schedule and stretching out that schedule.
Mhm.
The second thing is that 2 years that we negotiated for 2 years, 0, 0. Next year is one of those 0% that's in there. And then on top of that, when we have folks who are retiring, we're looking at positions through attrition or looking at positions that we are placing with some retires. We're able to see that cost because the scale is different. And then if it's a retiring teacher who possibly might be at the very top of the scale, and us being able to find quality candidates that are more towards the beginning of the scale.
Beginning of their career.
Correct. There's significant savings for the district in that kind of a scenario with multiple pieces.
Right. So again, part of this is thank you to the teachers that kind of invested in this way. And it's very complicated and it's hard to see, but they've invested in the district's financial well-being. And we're just now starting to actually see.
I can say with some confidence, a lot of confidence, that the Teachers Association, we're talking about the fiscal stability of the district. They came to the table with something that was very realistic for us to do, for us to be able to maintain where we're at, knowing that such a high percentage of the budget do with the paying.
Right? 3/4 of it.
So, and yes, it was long. Yes, there were lots of things that we had to discuss, but we arrived at a place where we were making sure that we are supporting them in the ways that we need to, but also they were taking a 0 and a 0. It was 2 years. Next year, 2 years is something that was it's a good place for us to financially.
Well, I didn't.
You remember that we talked about when the studies that were done with comparing teacher salary to some other places around Southwest Ohio, and the idea that we were wanting to make sure that we weren't at the very tippy top, but we wanted to be competitive with everyone else. The decisions that we made were put us in a spot where we're not at the very top anymore. As school districts renegotiate with their associations and where their increases are, That information is always in flux.
Right.
But every year we get information about that. Study, we are falling back into a place to where it is more in alignment with what we feel like is the right thing to do. The amount that goes to the association of what's getting.
Right. I didn't have this connection planned, but it fits right now because it was something I did want to point out. And it's, Rob was kind enough to pull out a levy history for the district, and it goes, well, it really starts in 76, where there's a law of reason that, and I don't need to know about it, but 76, okay? And so the first, Rob and I have an understanding. He educates me about how complex this stuff is all the time, so. But I'll just read these off real quick. The first levy after 76 was in 1983. That means 7 years. A year later, there was one. 4 years later, there was one. 8 years later, good. Another 8 years later, good. 4 years, 3 years, 3 years. And I think what we're talking about tonight would make us the longest at 9 years between levies in this history. Now, in fairness, this is the connection. ESSER monies helped us stretch this, but we made very conscious decisions about how to use that money, and sometimes very different decisions than some of our colleague districts did. And things like we were just talking about, finally the connection, our teachers helped stretch this as well. So 9 years, and combined with what I was talking about, 2% a year in expenditure increases. I mean, that's often less than inflation alone. So that, I mean, that's hard to do, but it was done. So anyway, I just have one final question, then I'll shut up. And it's again for my education, levy delays. And I really don't, I'm not sure I have this right, but there are 2 opportunities in a given year to put a levy up. As I understand, May and November. You're talking about November of this year. From a revenue realization perspective, if we delayed to May, when do we see the first dollar of new levy revenue?
We'd ride the calendar all the way around until January of 2024. Those tax duplicates go out once a year.
So whether you vote on a levy in May or November, this is the thing I wasn't sure I had right, May or November, it makes no difference. You don't get the money until the following year anyway.
Only on new construction, but not on existing structures.
Okay. All right, I'm done. Everybody breathes a sigh of relief.
Other questions or comments?
The only thing that I would say is it's easy to kind of to go back to that same point, Kevin. I've been a proponent, as you guys know very well, of fiscal responsibility and how long can we push things back. I did the same math. You did 9 years is the longest that Loveland's gone in over 50 years, or in almost 50 years. Even if we push back November until May, that's an entire year less of revenue. And if you go back to your monthly balances, there's times where we're getting significantly below the cushion that we should keep. So as much as I would never like to see another tax levy again for school funding, I think it's a horrible system that you have to push it to each individual community. I think that you guys have done the best you can to show us why it's necessary now.
I do think that last slide is very important too, in terms of the effective tax rate, given the effective reduction that happens, that, we're at that lowest level in 2021, since at least in the last decade. So,
and just to reiterate, even if we do a 4.9 mil levy, that's still effectively less than it was in 2014.
5.6.
one other point we had discussed earlier was there's an existing bond that is still on the books that will come off in 2024, correct?
Yes.
So we gained back a mill,
Right.
correct?
Yes, correct. We will have defeased the debt in 2023, and we will not collect any more millage for the debt after that.
So very simply, that was a building project that is now paid off, and that one mill no longer is best, is what we're saying.
Yes, and I put that on in 1998. I didn't think I would be defeasing it.
Defease is a lovely word. So to recap your discussion was quite a bit of financial information about the district, but what it has boiled down to at this point is that Mr. Broadwater, and Mr. Giuffre are making a recommendation that the board consider a 4.9 mil levy for November of this year. And the steps would be that at the next week's meeting, there would be a resolution that would ask the auditor to certify that the numbers are in agreement with what is, and there's no reason that they wouldn't be, because you know that calculation. But anyway, the process is that there is a resolution where the auditor is then asked to certify what 4.9 mils would bring in for the district. Then in July, we have a July meeting, then would be a resolution to put that 4.9 mil levy on the ballot. Is that correct?
That's correct.
What I also heard was, I thought, but maybe the discussion got figured out by then, was some discussion. Mr. Doherty had mentioned that over the next week, there might be a little more clarity next week to the board for what exactly was in those numbers that might be possibilities of changes.
So you guys can help us with that during the course of the week. And we can talk about it openly, of course.
Sure.
On Tuesday.
Right. Well, some of it is in fact in the notes that go with Mr. Giuffre's slides. It's just that it wasn't all clear to me, not having been part of the finance committee discussion. So it may bear some delineating for next week.
One other piece that I think we have to keep, I talked about this the last time we had a meeting, exactly related to this, but it certainly has financial implications, is the hiring of bus drivers. Now, we've had a strategic, we talked about the fact that we've made a strategic move to reduce our need for bus drivers. Even if we provide high school busing, if we use this other tier system, that can effectively reduce the number that we would need. That's a strategic move we've made. What else might we be able to do strategically to attract more bus drivers in the district? There are only so many levers you can pull there, but as we look across other districts, are there some other strategic things that we could be doing? Because we look at that number and your eyes kind of pop when you think about the number that we've lost in the last number of years. And if we're not doing something different, how much more could we see that reduced to the point that we're right back at the place of being in crisis mode, dealing with bus drivers? So I think we need to think proactively about a strategic plan for that piece, for those action steps that we need to take to ensure that we can be competitive and hire drivers.
I think that goes, there's a larger discussion in terms of start times, delivery of transportation, how to recruit drivers. I've had 5 different state legislators in to discuss the school funding and why it really is pretty inequitable for communities like Loveland that are considered wealthy but don't have the industry or the business infrastructure. I'm also participating on a legislative committee trying to make it a little bit easier for individuals to become certified to be bus drivers in the state of Ohio. The state of Ohio is the 4th most difficult state for individuals to become drivers. And so kind of from that avenue, but then you're also looking at incentives. This is not unique to Loveland. This is obviously across the nation, but instead of admiring the problem, what could we do to kind of look and see? And 100% we can look at what that means because we've thrown out some ideas. What you'll find with bus drivers, a lot of times it's going to be individuals that because they love the district like Loveland. And so how do you recruit individuals from outside? So, yeah.
Any other discussion, questions?
I know that we're meeting next week to discuss a resolution, but prior to that, will there be any opportunity for community members to ask questions or communicate with us or you guys?
Just my email, treasurer@lovelandschools.org. I'll answer whatever questions come in. And I'll put it out on our webpage. This is on board docs. I'll also put it on the treasurer's webpage. And anything that we come up with regards to illustrations, I'll put it out there. I've been putting the monthly report, which has analytics on it and shows where we are at this point in time, but this presentation will be out there as well. And to answer your question about bus drivers, if we don't replace the ones we were paying last year, that line item would be less.
And that was 8. That was 8.
Yeah.
And we need 10. So all things being equal, that shouldn't be a huge hit on.
No.
Correct.
Right.
There you go, Kat.
So,
Okay. So to answer your question, next week, there was not, this was a special meeting, so there was not hearing of the public this evening. But next week would be a regular business meeting and there would be a hearing of the public session.
And
that doesn't give people a real opportunity though prior.
it's just certifying. It's just certifying.
The motion next week would be to ask if that amount is correct. So there would be time as well prior to the July meeting
Almost a
before it
month.
would be put on the ballot.
And out of curiosity, if something changed between now and the village changed, is that possible? Or are we locked into?
There has to be another certification. In other words, if the board would say, okay, we don't like 4.9, then you would need to do that certification resolution again before you could do the putting on.
And
the
you
ballot.
could certify 3 numbers if you wanted to at one time. All it is getting the county auditor to sign off on what those numbers are so that the decision to go to the Board of Election is made with his input.
I'm not saying we should do this.
No.
I just thought of it now,
Yeah.
but we could next week say we want a certification for 3, 3.5, or 4.9
Yes.
and have that to us.
I've done it before,
I was going to ask if it had been done before and whether the auditor would like it or not.
1996.
So Rob, just
3 and 20.
process wise, just so everybody understands, the July is simply to have the county auditor certify. It's not placing on the ballot. There's another
June.
Next
resolution.
Tuesday.
Next Tuesday is.
Tuesday,
Yes.
but yeah. So when you talk about process for if it's going to be placed on the ballot, what does that look like? What month are you talking?
It's July 12th,
Okay,
but we have until August 5th.
That's the 90-day in the law.
Yes.
Right?
I just shut my computer off.
so the reason I asked that is to Eileen's question, there is time to have discussion. Also, the rationale for the 4.9 is simply to get out of deficit spending. And so the questions can be directed to Mr. Dufresne or myself, and then other opportunities, but it's a valid question.
And then this kind of goes off of what you were talking about, certifying different amounts. When you put it on a ballot, do you just put operating levy, or could you potentially have 2 different operating levies on there for different amounts? Because then if the taxpayers support busing and running a deficit versus a separate one, I'm thinking more like safety and the social and emotional piece. Are those things that are able to be figured out on a ballot as far as
You
millage
can,
and levies, or
you-
does that
you can,
muddy it too much?
but the general operations of the district and the purpose, whatever that language says, that's what you have to spend the money on.
Right.
And so this is a general operating levy for continuing purpose. There are safety levies. The county tried to put a consortium together of people, put like a $500,000 on for safety. But at this time, I'm just going from what we've been doing and trying to keep us moving forward. But perhaps you might want to come in,
Mhm.
talk to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I know that's on the forefront of everyone's minds right now.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't want to bundle it in. Because if we're trying to get out of a deficit,
So we could vote
would-
to put two issues
Again,
and the community could say yay to one and nay to the other,
correct.
presumably.
Mhm. And the only thing I would say, Eileen, is that to get to this point has been 4 months of going back and forth on these numbers. So that, whatever that would be, that we just need to be very clear about what those expenditures are for.
Anything else? All right, then those were the two items that were on our special meeting agenda. So it would be appropriate for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
second,
Dr. Washburn seconded. Mr. Giuffre, can we vote on that?
Dr. Schwetchner,
Yes.
Washburn,
yes.
Mr. Gardy,
Yes.
Reverend Eiler,
Yes.
Dr. Lorenz.
Yes, motion carried. I have us adjourned at 8 PM.